Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our final session on the Thursday of the conference. My name is Gerard Culley. I'm the Director of IT Services in University College Cork. And the topic we're going to talk to you a little bit today about is navigating the challenges and opportunities of the modern campus. So to help me with that, we're going to have a panel discussion. I'm going to talk a little bit for a while on some of those themes, and we're going to have a panel discussion with some of my colleagues here. So to my left, I have Mike Murphy, Professor Emeritus, TUD, and Chair of the HEAnet Board. I have Heidi Fraser-Krauss, CEO of GISC, the equivalent of HEAnet in the UK. So thank you very much for coming all the way over to us. And finally, Ronan Byrne, who you all know, CEO of HEAnet. And maybe just to start by congratulating HEAnet, it's been a fantastic conference so far. Loads of energy, loads of information. All the feedback is really positive. So maybe just to reflect on the question at hand, you know, one of the things that struck me is in a post-pandemic landscape that our digital campus has become as important to our students as our physical campus. Now, we don't spend nearly as much money on our digital campus as we do as our physical campus. We were speaking of that earlier, and we've got to change that. But in terms of students, in terms of their experience, how they engage the world, that was one of the takeaway lessons from me. And of course, one of the other observations here is this whole digital thing. Well, we can only blame ourselves because it was born in universities. So George Boole, I will name check UCC, invented Boolean algebra. Tim Berners-Lee was working in CERN when he built the World Wide Web. Vince Cerf, working in University of California when the internet was born. So universities and higher education has always had a key role in this digital project. And as it matures and as it becomes having more impact on our lives, and with AI perhaps moves into real adulthood in terms of driving the world, I think it's really important that education stays in that conversation and continues to work to drive technology that benefits society, because that's some of the things we're going to talk a little bit about later on. I'm going to, before I move on to that, I'm going to talk about three main themes today. One is to do with pace of technology and cyber, and we've had lots of great conversations about those today, and also artificial intelligence. So it's really driven about the pace of technology and what that's doing. Another interesting observation I have in terms of a trend is the whole regionalization that the geopolitical situation in the world is driving. So that will possibly mean stronger alignment with what people are doing across the European Union on technology, on standards, on research, on data. And the third theme I wanted to discuss was the impact that technology can have now on social good, and again, kind of a post-pandemic lesson. So before we get into pace, I mean, an old saying goes that civilization is a race between education and catastrophe. And I suppose this talk proposes that in the 21st century, education, we've got to make sure education wins that race. So, I'm afraid now my clicker is going to let me down. Maybe someone can move on the slide for me if that's all right. Sorry about this. Take a drink. Are we good? Great. Okay. Sorry about that. The clicker isn't working for me. So the first point really is about the pace of change. And the first picture you see is UCC's computer center in the 1970s. And this is UCC's computer center now. I mean, the technology is everywhere. The pace has been exponential, driven by Moore's law. And the theme I wanted to talk a little bit about that is, we need to make sure that society is ready for that pace change, because the pace change keeps coming, and it's coming faster and faster at us. And it's probably the reason why technology is by far the biggest industry in the world. If we look at Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Apple, they're by far the largest companies in the world. And I think that is because it amplifies that superpower that people have to work together in big numbers. But it also amplifies the impact that has on our world. So it makes it all the more important that we are very careful and we guide this and we make sure that it's driving society forwards. Another kind of observation I have, and the next slide will cover it, is to do with that we tend to overestimate the amount of change that will happen in the short term when it comes to technology, but we tend to greatly underestimate the impact of that technology as over a longer period of time. And I think that's kind of epitomized there, but we have the Gartner hype cycle. And I just want to explain that we have these innovation triggers which really kind of drive that innovation. So generative AI is one of those, and that happened in November 2022. So we're in the middle of that hype cycle now, where I don't think generative AI is going to change the world in the next year or two as much as we might think. It's going to make us change our assessment strategy, but we'll figure that out and we'll work on that. However, if we do look at AI over the next 10 years, I think it's going to have a material impact. And that's really where the hype cycle comes in, is that we tend to overestimate. Then we go through this trough of disillusionment where we think, oh, it's just not working, it's not doing what we want it to do. And then we move on and society figures out how to drive value out of it. And I find when we stop talking about the technology, that's when we know it's changed us. Because we're no longer talking about cloud computing, we're not longer talking about mobile computing. They're just kind of taken for granted now. And that's, I think, when we know that the change has stuck. So we see AI is currently at the peak of that kind of expectations. We see student information systems, SAS, is kind of stuck in the trough of disillusionments, and it is challenging to work with those. When we see other developments then, like master data management, reaching more productive areas. So I think that is kind of the idea of the pace is very quick, and the change that we get in the long term is actually even more than we expect. So the next slide, we can move on to the next slide, and I'm covering quite a few things here. Oh yes, and I like this slide. So this deals with pace as well, and really, you know, we forgot about the impact of the iPhone, but really it's completely changed our world and how we engage with the world. So just like the image. And the next one, please. So the next topic really, so first of all, I want to just give a shout out to my colleagues in our cyber team, Caoimhe, Katie and Barry. Cybersecurity is one of the themes we wanted to speak about. And you mentioned it, if you talk to people here today, most of the people you meet that are new, they're cyber analysts. Because, you know, we're all trying to skill up for this. And I think cyber in our careers is going to remain the #1 priority of our institutions. It's going to drive all sorts of other strategies like SaaS and data management, but cyber is going to remain possibly our top priority. And in a way, it's the tax that we pay for digitization. So we want to digitize, we want all this transformation, and there's a cost to that. And I think that cost is going to continue to challenge our budgets. We're going to have to spend more of the percentage of our turnover to protect ourselves on cyber, and that's going to keep happening. And we also need to keep upskilling and keep ready for this. Things have changed a lot more. We're really good in the last 2 years. Across the sector, you see strong growth and capability built into that, but it's not going away. It's going to continue to be a challenge, and we're going to have to continue to invest in it. The next theme, just to discuss it, it's on the same slide, is artificial intelligence. And I mentioned earlier, my belief is that that amplifies that human capability we have of working together in large numbers, and it takes it to a different level. But it's not going to work if we don't have proper data quality in our institutions. And there's a significant cost to getting your data in good order, and there's a significant governance overhead of that. So that's an important obligation on us now. If we want to leverage artificial intelligence more, we're going to have to take our data more seriously and govern it more seriously. We, of course, use AI in every day. At the moment, we use it in predictive text. We use it in our Google Maps. We use it in Teams and Zoom to kind of enhance it. And I think, and that's why I think what we're going to see with AI is it's going to become inbuilt into the product capabilities over the next number of years. And before we know it, it's going to be doing a lot more. And while generative AI right now is not going to fool an assessment really, and you can kind of game around it, in a decade, you know, that's going to be a different story. So there is going to be an importance for us about embedding AI in our curriculum, about using artificial intelligence where we can to automate and protect our environment and automate our work processes where it makes sense and release people to more productive activities. But there's a big question there as well. Can society keep up with that? Will there be too much job displacement? Will there be enough retraining for people? And another important consideration, I think, is that I don't think it's quite written yet how humanity's relationship with AI is going to work out. And it could be different in different parts of the world. How AI is regulated and operated in Europe could be different to the US, and that could be different to China and other parts of the world. So there's important considerations there, and those can be shaped by policymakers and people in this room. And it's my proposal here that education needs to continue to have an important role in AI. The next graphic on this slide is HEAnet. So this is a European Universities Cities Initiative. That's what the acronym stands for. But that's 9 European universities, including University College Cork, trying to make it completely seamless for students to operate their courses, their programs, their credits across our universities. And that is part of the future. And I think it demonstrates, how Europe has got a really important part to play in our small economy, and we need to lean more into that. We're all using Eduroam here. We've been working with IRLDAT and NORF standards and resin, research standards coming out. I think there's a lot more security for this small little island and this small economy. You're really staying close to the standards coming out of Europe, to the work that HEAnet are doing with HEAnet and all that. There's also, of course, quite a large Brexit dividend that we can possibly tap more into than we are as the largest kind of, I suppose, native English-speaking country in the bloc. So really, I think we need to do more, and I think we're going to see more of that and that's going to be good for us in terms of how that works out. The final picture is from the garden in UCC, where there's quite a lot of wildflowers growing, and it's really about one of the takeaway points from the pandemic was that we switched on all this technology. And yes, we all got fed up with being 100% online. Our students got completely fed up with being 100% online. But students that had challenges, let's say in reading or in accessibility of the content or in other issues that they might be coping with, it was a huge leveling effect. And now that we've seen the impact of what captioning can do, of what accessible content can do, there's no going back. We can't unsee that. Small changes by our institutions can have material impact on the lives of 20–30% of our students. So we're going to continue to have a very important role in how we deploy technology to level the playing field. And really what started as disability rights have now become human rights. And I think that's going to stay, and that's a really positive thing, and it's great for the IT department to be involved in that. And we're going to spend more, I think, effort and time working on that. We also will have a role, of course, in that whole sustainability and climate action plans that we have. We're all committed to tackling the world's climate problems. Technology on its own is certainly not going to resolve that, but we can lower our power output, we can lower our carbon footprint, we can look at our scope 3 emissions around travel, we can look at large lectures and see if there's value of running those online and reducing the travel footprint. We can look at our smart buildings and how technology can actually drive lower energy use in those, and we can use data again to drive greater energy use in those buildings. So I think there's continues to be an important role, for how we deploy technology for social good. So the next slide is really a slide of the team in UCC planning our digital master plan, and Deirdre Deirdre did a lot of help to me on the visualizations of these slides, so thank you to Deirdre. That master plan was developed with the team in UCC, and I think we need to do something similar across the sector. I mean, we've already discussed how technology is having a lot more impact on our lives and on the lives of our children. We also have significantly grown the sector. So we have a population the size of Manchester, and we kind of have a higher education sector now, closer to the Dutch education sector. That's going to mean we need to align our activities and our priorities much more tightly if we want to afford to do everything that we want to do. We all want the outputs of this technology, but we're going to have to be able to put in the hard work around common data standards, common architectural models, and the ingredients are all there. We kind of know individually what to do, but I feel we do need to look strategically at what our priorities are as a sector and work together to maybe map those out. And it would be remiss and silly of me to kind of go through these slides without calling out that we're chronically underfunded in terms of digital. I mean, shared services has gotten, through great work by HEAnet, some funding towards SOC and SEAM, but there's so much more we should be doing. I come from a private sector background where they were actually giving me too much funding and asking me and putting me under pressure to deliver. So it's quite unusual that we're not kind of investing more in technology. I think the days of not investing in technologies and not prioritizing it is done. So I think that would be quite a welcome piece, that we drive a strategy together, working with policymakers, working with shared services, working with the universities in question, figure out our priorities, map it into a strategic plan for higher education. Minister Normal Foley this morning spoke of the strategic plan that exists for secondary education, and there is, I looked it up online, so why don't we build something similar with our funders, with the policymakers, with shared services, and then we can lobby more confidently to get that funded. So I suppose that's really the essence of the areas I wanted to kind of talk about today. I have no answers, only more questions. And I'm going to hand over to Mike now, who's going to maybe take some questions from the audience as well. The next slide, actually, we can pop it up now, offers an opportunity and if we move on one more, there's a Slido that will offer you an opportunity to talk about what topics are more important to you. So the options should pop up there in a moment on that. And what I'm going to do is I'll hand over to Mike, who's going to field the first question, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed the talk so far.
Thanks, Ger. And as Ger said, you've got Slido now as a way to express your view in terms of what's more important, but also to pop questions in there as well. And we do have the microphones on the floor, so don't be shy about standing up or putting your hand up and managing to ask these experts, because I'm not the expert at all. I'm just going to try and make sure that we get some good questions going to our panels. And Ger, maybe if I could just transition in terms of what you said. And I suppose it's easy to say, but there is always this kind of frisson of fear, I think, when we're at the coalface. You talked about the accelerating pace of technology, and it's easy to say, but that's really frightening, especially in institutions that traditionally are not known for fast pace and fast response. So do you think universities can adapt to this enduring change in technology and ensure that they remain agile and responsive to the emerging trends that are coming?
Yeah, sure they can, definitely. And I can say that because we've all lived through COVID, the pandemic. In a week, we pivoted the entire operation of our institutions, of our shared services, of our teaching and learning online. It was a pain. It was stressful. It wasn't optimal. But when the will is there, of course we can. We can definitely make this change. But it's going to demand more of us. I think it's going to demand us to be a bit more, cohesive. It's going to require us to plan a little bit better. It's going to require us to look at our funding models a little bit better. So we need the enablers. But there's no question, if the will is there, and it is, then we can do it, in my opinion.
Okay, so I'm going to come back and ask Ronan and Heidi, their key takeaway from your presentation. But you've just teed a kind of a nice question up for me. So, Heidi, is there a coherent strategy in the UK that supports the use of technology in the evolving modern digital campus?
No.
So we're not missing anything.
That's the end of my thesis, Heidi.
But I think that there is a growing acceptance that we need that. So vice-chancellors, I have to say that the impact of the pandemic in the UK anyway was to make top tables in particular really understand and appreciate the value of digital. And there is now, with the same financial pressures I think you're facing in Ireland, definitely there in the UK, with people saying, actually, we need to do this as a sector. It shouldn't just be individual institution by individual institution. So we haven't got one, but I think we will get one.
Okay, so we can take heart from that we're not necessarily behind the 8 ball. I think that actually answers the first question that came into us as well. But let me just go back and ask you, Ronan, in listening to Ger, for you and your role and what you see, what was the key takeaway from Ger's talk for you?
Well, there's a number, I think, Mike, but I'm seeing a strong correlation to what Ger's presenting here And the work of, we have a group advisory forum which has been established, and indeed Mike is close to that. And we have on that, and that's, when I say group advisory, that's across HEAnet and HECampus to give us strategic direction. And one of the first items off the list was cyber security. But the one that probably silent underneath a challenge is that data standards, data governance. And whether that's for the university to run its business in a more intelligent way, but also to report back to the system with regard to performance and monitoring as well. So I think that data standards piece is one which is it's a tricky one to challenge, probably not the most obviously exciting one, but I think that feeds everything. And then you layer AI on top, and what data pool is that coming from, and how is that structured? So I think that's probably the less obvious, but possibly the most challenging.
Okay, and then Heidi, the same question, but you're looking at it now from, I suppose, more UK experience. When you listened to Ger, what resonated as the kind of the strongest message?
So I think the first thing to say is that everything I heard there was extremely familiar. So I think that, you know, that what's going on in the UK is very similar to what's going on in Ireland. But I think the thing that I pick out from conversations with universities is that there have been, over the years, a lack of strategic focus on technology. It has been seen as something that the IT department takes care of. And I think you do a great job at that, but you need that strategic leadership. And I think that's what you were sort of talking about there. If we're going to make the most of some of these things, what we need is that top table, not saying, oh, digital, you know, struggle with that, not for me. It needs to be built in. And if you talk about other industries, that's exactly what they're doing. Digital is at the heart of everything that they're doing in their decision making, not off to the side. There's more investment going in, not less. That's what I would pick out.
Yeah, really good. When we talk digital and we talk technology, it's easy to forget that there are people that are, if you like, on the receiving end of that. And the people are, you know, the staff, faculty, but also students. And the question that is how do modern campuses deliver student wellness and ensure students stay connected to the college in a hybrid learning environment?
Will I take that?
Sure.
I mean, there's a variety of things. There's no single answer. Most of our campuses are in some kind of hybrid form now. Most are not fully online. So there's always that physical presence. And actually, students love to come on campus. So the campuses are full. They're extremely social. There's no challenge with them kind of engaging online. But there's a lot of online supports now there that are making, you know, wellness, you know, better. I mean, we use our data to track, you know, options of maybe somebody dropping out of a program, so we can kind of make early interventions. We use technology, you know, if people are uncomfortable to come to campus and queue outside or wait to see somebody on a kind of a counselling session, they can use technology to engage in that. There are online technology supports such as programs like Silver Cloud, which gives a lot of online supports for students. There's a very big priority set within UCC to making all our content accessible. So, I mean, we have the tech for that now, but we've got a centre all set up. If there's an academic colleague who wants to take their content and run their PDFs and their Word documents through the accessibility wizards and all that, people will work with you to get that done. So I think that bar has really moved, and I think it is now seen within universities as an obligation to provide those wellness supports. So there's quite a lot done in that space.
Okay, and let me, if I could, just ask you to expand a little bit, because you talked about it in your talk and kind of referring to it there. The role that technology can play for social good, if you like, to level the playing field was the phrase that you used.
Yep.
Can you give maybe some specific examples that you see coming online or just down the road that are actually going to help in the higher education space to level that playing field while not alienating people?
We kind of see it already. I mean, some of the tools that we're seeing with PowerPoint Live, using AI, automatic captioning. I mean, what's happening is the friction is being removed from how hard it is to do these things. So there's no excuse not to do them. There might be license implications down the road because vendors have a habit of making you get fond of a product and then switching on a cost to it. But right now, straight away, I can see the way Office 365 has evolved is immediately a benefit to students with different challenges, and will continue to be a better benefit because you're going to have these features inbuilt. It's going to be trivial to set up a PowerPoint a lecture, have the captioning switched on, have transcription services switched on, make sure all the content's accessible, and that's going to become easier. So I think the tech evolution is going to continue to remove the friction out of trying to make the content more accessible.
Okay, and Ronan, if I could jump to you, just again to probe that a little bit more. So Ger has said that he would see that technology like AI, et cetera, is going to end up getting built into existing tools as they evolve and then roll out with those additional capabilities. Is there a fear at all from where you sit that as a consequence, AI, as a general phrase, may not just be, if you like, for good, but could actually end up bringing more, for example, shadow IT into the university campus that I'm sure many people in the room have really worked very hard to try and minimize over the last 10, 15 years?
There is, obviously, of course, and that's the big concern, that it would be used for bad or ill or whatever. But I think a lot of how AI, particularly when it's bolted into particular products, because it's going to come in with the products that we buy, and the big vendors will bolt it into their products. I think and I think that's good, right? And I think particularly when you're in the shared services business, I would say this, as a shared services business, if you can gather around a particular blueprint, I think that helps. But I think the challenge is going to be, if you're going to procure something, let's say a student system, and it's got this AI features, how do you know that that's actually going to deliver what you want to deliver in the manner that you want it to do? And obviously there's a big governance wrapper to go around this, and that's not there yet. So at the minute it's in the hype cycle, and we're trying to contain it, but it's running away. But ultimately we need to catch up.
That's fascinating. And Heidi, my understanding is that you've done a little bit of student surveying work. What are students in the UK saying about AI and its use and what they're looking at?
Yeah, so just for information, JISCA's got a national centre for AI, or National Centre for AI in Tertiary Education. Have a look at their website because it's really good. But they did a piece of work with students where they had a number of focus groups and asked students, first of all, were they using AI? And the answer was absolutely yes in every single aspect of what they were doing, whether that was support for maths, whether that was support for writing, you name it. Image manipulation, etc. But they did have a number of concerns about it. So some of them were quite surprising to me. So students were actually very interested in AI being regulated. They felt they were scared. So going back to that point, they were scared of some of the things that were being talked about, and they wanted guardrails around it. They were worried about understanding how to use AI properly, but also how institutions would use AI on them. So they were really worried about plagiarism, being accused of plagiarizing by putting something through an AI tool, even when they hadn't. So they were very worried about that. They were worried about sustainability. So they all know that, there's been a lot in the press about how carbon intensive the ChatGPT-like models are. And they also wanted transparency around the use of AI. So if lecturers, for example, were using AI to generate course content, they didn't really have a problem with that, or marking their work, but they wanted to know, and they wanted the institution to have very clear policies around that. And then finally, they were worried about this digital divide. So we did a piece of work looking at all the tools. If you wanted to subscribe to the many tools that there are free versions, but if you want the really good stuff, you have to pay. And it got to something like £77 a month if you wanted to use something to generate good content, something to do good image manipulation, etc. And students were very worried about that. So I thought that was interesting coming from them, but they were accepting of it. It wasn't a don't ban it. They thought that was ridiculous.
Okay. Really fascinating. So a lot of the talk about AI when it comes to higher education is essentially the student-facing supports, assessments online, etc., and how that can happen. But are you seeing any, across the three of you, are you seeing any initiatives that would mean that AI can actually help with back office administration, shared services, and what are you seeing? What, if you look in your crystal ball or just down the road, what's happening?
Do you want me to start?
Yep, sure.
We're seeing, I think, a lot of expectation that, can we release the burden of administration so that administrative and professional services staff can do more useful and interesting activities, so processing transcripts or exam results or all that processing piece. There's definitely an opportunity there and an expectation from the leadership that maybe because these are very big machines, these universities. They have a lot of activities, they have a lot of governance, they have a lot of reporting needs. And so people are extremely busy and would dearly welcome if there was a manual or task that could be defined. But it all depends on data. So I think a lot of the work is really highlighting we've got to get our act together to get our data in good order. Because if you don't have good data, the artificial intelligence, lives and thrives off that data that you have. So I think that's what we're seeing is an awareness that this could really help us, but we're going to have to get much more disciplined. And actually, but there is one piece. The first question to ask is, what problems do we want to solve? So we got to get really specific, and then it'll help us to say, well, maybe it's not appropriate to screen CVs, or maybe it's better for screening CVs because it's not as biased as maybe I would be. But I think when we get really specific about what exact specific problems that we want to solve, then we can deploy technology sensibly, we can get the data right, and we can deliver better outcomes. But leaping into the technology on its own, is a problem.
Thank you. Thank you. So Ronan, if I could
I have
get you
a candidate use case, if I may, from a shared service provider, which is tender procurement. And I'd love it to throw an AI at my evaluation of tenders. And I'm thinking of the GIS, which is probably 1,000 plus tenders. And you've run, obviously, your structured data and you've structured your tender documentation. But how do you debrief the winners and losers at the end of the day?
Put it in ChatGPT.
Yeah.
But without being frivolous, I think there's something that could potentially, where you have a structure, a workflow, and you're just trying to fast track that.
And Heidi, what do you think in terms of the non-student facing, the back office type supports that AI might deliver?
So the example I heard very recently, so you may be aware that in the UK we run something called the NSS, the National Student Survey.
Yep.
And you get loads and loads of comments back on that, and people have been using it to analyse their NSS comments, which has saved an enormous amount of time and meant that they didn't spend time reading them, but actually spent time acting on them. But I think the potential in the back office is enormous. Think of meetings that are on Teams, you switch on, do the minutes for me, function that will come with Copilot. There you go, all done. So I think there's loads and loads of things that would make life better.
Yeah. I'm going to take a couple of direct questions now coming in, and I probably missed a couple of questions as well. I am going to cycle back and ask about our staff and our staff well-being and how we develop our staff. But first of all, a question, what about starting with student identity? From Leaving Cert to lifelong learning, wouldn't it make sense to have a lifelong student identity? Now, Ronan, you touched on that, and I know there's a national initiative that is looking at elements of that. So, is that just like the old social security number from birth to death?
Well, we can't say PPSN. We get into trouble. In fact, that was a conversation way back to 2008.
Yeah.
You remember that, Gerard? Trying to deliver services to the student base, and this was actually schools-based, secondary schools. And there's challenges, obviously, using the PPSN because that's not the reason it's given. But I wrote a small paper at the time with exactly this, lifelong learner ID, which will then follow you right the way through your various institutions. And I still think there's merit in it. whether practically, but also from a cost-saving point of view. Because how many identities are replicated across different HEIs and so forth. Then you've got micro-credentials, and that's picking up another identity and so forth. So I think, you know, maybe, and also a trend, as we've seen, is the establishment of the technological universities. And there you see some collapsing from 3 to 1 or whatever number it is. So you could go a step further and have a single AD for a cohort or sub-cohorts or so forth. So I just think it would take a lot of challenges away. It would make federation a lot easier, and just obviously accessing courses across different institution offerings.
Portability of services from campus to campus, institution to institution.
Entirely.
Ger, any?
Yeah, I mean, I just couldn't agree more. It's just as obvious, and it really just needs the departments and ourselves to work a little bit closely together. We would love when the CAO number comes in, if there was an identity with that, you know, it would just provide continuity for the student. They could bring a portfolio that they might have had in their leaving cert on art or on something else with them into university. It would make the transitioning in process a little bit easier. Their email address would be consistent. We could map this, keep it as an alias. The technology stack that supports the PPSN infrastructure is the Microsoft Azure infrastructure that most of us are using anyway in our institutions. So technically there'd be no barrier either. So I absolutely think if we could get over any kind of concerns from a data protection perspective, which I think is where the concerns sat the last time, then I definitely think it would be very valuable to students, and it would be very consistent, you know, with that whole lifelong learning experience. Yeah.
Very good. And Heidi, are you seeing anything like this?
So exactly the same conversation is going on in the UK around a single identity to go from school right the way through to the end of your life. But it's a holy grail, this one. And I was really interested. I went to an event last year, and South Africa has made huge strides in this one of having a sort of single source of truth around qualifications that everybody has.
Yeah.
So I think it's it would be so beneficial.
It would.
I mean, all sorts of things, isn't it? I think about this. If I want to prove, you know, what I got at school or at university, I've got to go rifling in a cupboard to find certificates. I mean, it's mad. So yes, exactly the same conversation.
Okay, very good. Security challenges. So we're living it. I mean, the first main session this morning was on SOC-SEAM services, for example. So in terms of where we're moving to, does AI have any impact on cybersecurity? Is it a force for good or not? So maybe, Roland, start with you first in terms of how you see AI and cybersecurity playing a role together.
I'd say right now we don't know if it's a force for good. I think with regard to SOC and SIEM and technologies and the product and vendors will know more than I, but absolutely there's got to be a greater under the bonnet of the SOC and SIEM that AI will do more of the processing given the amount of volumes in there. I'm looking at the second half of that question caught my eye about the end user awareness of what the data they're using, and to me it's going back to the early days of the internet. You do a search and you're going, is this true or not? You know, what's the authority of it? So I think that's a kind of, you flip it for the student exercise and trying to verify the authority, whatever about the source. You may not be able to create the source, but it's going back to, are your references accurate back in your thesis and so forth. So I think that's actually good, because we should be questioning the source of the data and the bias of the data. So I think that's a good challenge in that is putting more rigor and responsibility on the student to make sure that the authority is there before they extrapolate from it.
Okay. Heidi, Ger, any additional comments on that?
So I think on AI, so I think there's a good and an evil, isn't there? So I think you're quite right that using the algorithms on your SIEM data stuff is exactly a positive. But the negative is that you can then construct much more complex phishing attacks or other cyber incidents out of it. So I think there's a yin and a yang to that one. I mean, I have to say the thing I worry the most about AI is the fake news piece. I think that fact that you lose what is reality. I think that's the really big challenge, almost a security challenge in its own right, isn't it, around our society. What do you believe? What do you not believe? I think that's the thing that bothers me the most about it.
And knock-on implications for freedom of speech.
Freedom of speech, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that worries me the most.
Just to come back in, Mike, I think I heard just during the week that AI can then simulate your voice.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you're back to that second and third level of authentication. So I think the multi-factor authentication piece, is going to come more to the fore to try and counter some of the sort of the more nasty and intelligent.
Sure.
And like any tool, as people have said, it can be deployed for great good and for great bad. It's all the more important that it's properly regulated, that there are proper kind of protections for the citizens around how that data is used, because in the wrong hands, with the wrong attitude from a government agency, the control you could have on a population would be appalling. And again, it's that truth. Like, what's the reality? What's the truth? What's on telly, and what stories are happening? So I think it is back to making sure that the right ethics are put in, the right controls are in government to kind of make sure that society is protected from the bad side of it, because we're going to get all sorts of good stuff, but there is definitely all that negative truth, the dilution of truth piece as well.
So I want to get to the EU question in a moment, but I do want to spend a couple of minutes and listen to you. We've come through COVID. It placed an enormous strain, not just on students, but our staff. And what, Irish higher education delivered overnight was amazing. And Minister Harris was here last year and spoke to that, and had, nothing but praise to say for everybody that was involved. But in terms of this, if you like, enduring pace of change, without kind of trite statements of support, do we need to be doing anything more to support our staff, academic, non-academic, technical staff, administrative staff? Do we need to spend more time ensuring that they've got the competences and the skills they need? Are we putting in place enough and sufficient mental health supports? And maybe from your own experience in terms of what you're doing in your own areas of domain, what would you say to that?
Shall I start?
Please.
So can I just make a comment on the move as well? So everybody went online in COVID times very quickly. The only reason we were able to do that is because most of the technology was already there. You couldn't have conjured that out of a box. We just started to use it. So lots of the things that we had, we did. But to come back to the staffing bit, I think a real help to people has been the move to hybrid working. So I've got, there's 1,200 staff in JISC now, and we've just done our staff survey. And the number of comments that have been in the survey about the flexibility to work from home or to come in, being able to manage that time, doing the school run or whatever it is, has been a real positive for people. So, I think that there were also awful dark things in the pandemic, but some of the things that came out of that, they sort of broke the mold. And we're now using technology, I think, quite effectively in that space. I think the one thing I worry about is people who are, particularly young people who join our organisations, and they haven't got any social capital at all when they join a company. And it's really difficult to get to know people if you're mainly, lots of your team are not in the office and whatever. So that's the area I'm focusing on at the moment in my organisation.
Okay. Ronan, you put up the well mark, the wellness mark this morning. So well done to you and your team. So what's working, and how do you see it when you engage with higher education clients?
I think on the wellness piece, I think back in COVID, it was recognizing we're working from home in a pandemic. This isn't normal working from home. But I think we're still coming out of it. I still think people have reflected on where they assign their energies and so forth. And something we're watchful for, both in person but also remote, and just continuity of engagement is, when somebody's in the office 80% of the time, back before COVID, it's quite easy to see the pattern of wellness and whether somebody's having a bad day and so forth. That's really more difficult when somebody's remote. And I sometimes I think not every staff members appreciates that with good intention that we're encouraging more footprint on the piece. I think just kind of loop back to we just flipped into COVID and everything was great, right? But obviously it was unstructured training. There was no formal training. And I'm sure there's some staff members in HEs that really struggled with it, and particularly those that are trying to deliver labs. But I will obviously go back to the infrastructure piece, but I think about it, and I just know it's not HE, but you think of our school sector and the teaching from home, because the infrastructure is not there in the school, for example. And Heidi's exactly right. This happened, let's say, 15 years ago. Maybe 10, 15. We couldn't have coped. So to me, the message is investing in infrastructure, but we need more greater resiliency. And you can see it in the improvements of the products, the Zooms and Teams. They're racing to catch up. So I think we've learned a lot, but there's still a ways to
Yeah. And Ger, if I could just kind of leverage off a phrase, investing in technology and infrastructure, do we need to invest more in our people?
Oh, we do. Yeah. I mean, we need to match our ambitions with real investment. That is important. I mean, the teams in the front line of our universities have been incredible, for years under pressure from a pandemic, moving into cyber attacks consistently, getting platitudes from the likes of me saying, "You're great, thank you so much," but still calls at the weekends over and over again, databases, infrastructure, networks, most of them in this audience. What they might demand of us is, now that it's stabilised a bit, we get our act together, we have a proper strategy for the sector, and we match our ambitions for pace with the reality of funding those, so that people are properly trained, there's backfills, there's a pace correlation with funding correlation. And I do think we underfund. And for an economy that's got such a strong digital reputation, it's just a bit surprising that it's so challenging to get public funding into. And as I said, I came from a private sector background where, in fact, they gave us too much money because they were in such a rush. So I definitely think that's what they would ask us: have a plan, slow things down, get the pace right, and map the pace to the actual resourcing associated with that. And I think that's not an unreasonable ask.
Okay. So I'm going to ask Ronan the question that's on the screen, but I'm going to then conclude and ask each of you, all things considered, what is the key leave behind comment that you would like to make on this subject? So Ronan, probably a good news story, but can you just give us your view of how we support, from an Irish perspective, or Irish higher education supports the EU digital single market?
If I talk more generally about aligning to EC digital agendas, I think you look at GEONT, and I put up the map earlier about the upgrade of the GEONT network. That's on foot of 49 million, roughly, 48.7 million funding from EC communities, and that's obviously giving a benefit to all, and it's addressing digital divide and particular challenges. But so the GEONT is one. I think the tracking activities such as the EOSC Association as well, and trying to create a federated digital landscape for open research and a web of federated open science is part of it. But I kind of flipped the question a little bit as well, is that the key genesis and success of something like a GEONT IS framework is we are operating as a single digital market, and the vendors can see that, so they're attracted to these pan-European digital frameworks, and from that we extract better value and better economies of scale for all.
Okay.
So I think it's absolutely attaching to follow the money to the Parliament, but it's attaching to those pieces and then try to align it with our NORFs and local national member activities.
Thank you. So in wrapping up then, Heidi, all things considered, what is the key thought that you would like to leave us with today?
So the key thought is that technology is a strategic asset for your institution, and that's how you need to think about it, fund it, lead it.
Thank you. Ger, same question.
You have significant impact on the future generations of this country. You don't realise that, I think, till your own kids go through the university system, but the support you provide, the technology you build, the interventions you make have huge bearings on the life of future generations. So that's a great thing to be proud of, and I think people should take that away, from the conference and from their role in that.
Okay, and Gerard, Ronan, final word with you.
I think it's, we talked about the pace of change, and we see incomings like AI and so forth, but we also spoke about the funding mechanism and how that works. And if I look at our SOC and SEAM example, which I think is a really good example of being, coming together as a cybersecurity advisory group, picking the top candidate, but then building a business case, then going for funding, and then rolling it out, even going as fast as I think we feasibly can, it's still 18 months. And then you have onboarding and everything else. So I think we need to somehow have fast-track innovative funding, and I think that can be helped if we can attach it to a national policy, because immediately you're one step ahead because we have the policy to execute it on. So I think that's a real challenge. I think the departments are respectfully inviting compelling business cases, and I think we're pushing an open door, but I think it's attaching to the funding as quick as the threats and opportunities are coming at us is the real challenge.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody who is here, but also who submitted really good questions in, and I apologize that I didn't get to all of them, or particularly the earlier questions. I think it's been a pleasure listening to the key industry leaders in this space and to hear your views in terms of what's happening. So can I ask you all to give a round of applause to our speakers? I think that concludes the afternoon, and it's going to be drinks and the gala dinner later on this evening. So thank you all.